We were seated around the grand mahogany dining table, the same one I had paid $5,000 to have meticulously restored last year, when my father complained that the wood was losing its natural luster. The crystal wine glasses clinked in a cheerful toast, reflecting the warm, golden light of the imported chandelier hanging above us. My mother, Blair, had spared no expense for this Friday night dinner. The smell of roasted lamb, expensive herbs, and a bold Cabernet Sauvignon filled the room, creating an atmosphere of overwhelming luxury. She had hired a private chef for the evening, likely because my younger sister, Fallon, had brought along her incredibly wealthy friend, Kendall. Everything had to look impeccable. Everything had to scream generational wealth and effortless class. But as I sat there, picking at the overpriced food on my porcelain plate, all I could taste was exhaustion. I had just come from a grueling 4-hour shift at the commercial fleet leasing yard. Despite having washed my hands twice with industrial-strength soap in the employee restroom before driving here, I could still catch the faint, lingering scent of diesel fuel and engine grease on my skin. I was 32 and the regional director of the leasing division. I was the one who kept the massive logistics trucks running, the one who negotiated the fleet contracts, the one who navigated the gritty, unglamorous reality of the transportation industry. It was hard, relentless work, but in this beautiful, fragrant dining room, I was nothing more than an invisible ghost. I was the silent, unappreciated solution to every single financial problem this family encountered. Across the table, Fallon was commanding the spotlight as she always did. She tossed her perfectly styled blonde hair over her shoulder, laughing loudly and dramatically at something Kendall had just said. Fallon called herself a luxury lifestyle PR consultant. She had embossed business cards on heavy cardstock, and a curated Instagram profile that looked like a high-end travel magazine. In reality, she was a 8-year-old who spent her days taking aesthetic photos in high-end cafes and her nights swiping credit cards that were firmly linked to my personal bank account. She generated no real income, but she generated a massive amount of expenses. The conversation drifted to the hardships of maintaining a high society image. Fallon sighed deeply, swirling her expensive wine in the glass, playing the part of the exhausted socialite. She leaned toward Kendall, shaking her head with an expression of profound burden. "It's just so draining, carrying the weight of everyone else around me," Fallon complained, her voice dripping with artificial weariness. Then, she turned her head slowly, her eyes met mine across the table. Her gaze narrowed, and that familiar, mocking glint appeared in her eyes. "Honestly, Kendall, I tell my parents all the time, we need to get rid of the dead weight around here. Let's just cut out the useless people in this family. You're first up, Morgan." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The useless one. I froze. My silver fork hovered inches from my plate. My heart stopped for a fraction of a second. I waited for the inevitable rebuke. I waited for my father, Declan, to slam his hand on the table, clear his throat, and tell her to watch her disrespectful mouth. I waited for my mother to step in and defend the elder daughter who had literally kept the roof over their heads for the last 4 years. I waited for someone, anyone, to acknowledge the absurdity of what had just been said. Instead, my father let out a loud, hearty laugh. He reached over with the wine bottle and generously poured Fallon another glass. "She's got a point, Morgan," he chuckled, his face flushed with alcohol and amusement. "You have to admit, you don't exactly fit the aesthetic we're trying to build around here. You always look so worn out." My mother smiled softly, a gentle, enabling smile, as she patted Fallon's hand affectionately. "Oh, Declan, leave your sister alone. Fallon just can't help that she lacks our refined tastes. She works in a parking lot, for heaven's sake. Honestly, the only thing she's really good for is her money. Anyway, speaking of which, Morgan, darling, I need you to take care of the catering bill for next week's country club summer cocktail party. It's only about $7,000. Just transfer it into my checking account by Monday morning, would you?" They laughed. A chorus of casual, comfortable cruelty. The anger that hit me in that precise moment wasn't loud. It wasn't a screaming, hot-tempered explosion. It was cold. It was ice. It was the sudden, shocking realization that I was bleeding myself dry for people who genuinely resented me for getting my blood on their expensive designer shoes. The stakes here were no longer just my savings account or my credit score. It was my dignity. It was my sanity. It was my fundamental right to exist as a human being instead of an ATM. I looked down at my hands. They were calloused, strong, and capable. They were the hands of a fiercely independent woman. Then I looked at Fallon's wrist, adorned with the glittering gold Rolex watch I had bought her for her last birthday, because my parents had literally begged me to keep up appearances for her fake business. "You know what?" I said, my voice dangerously quiet, cutting through the ambient noise of the room. The laughter at the table slowly died down. Kendall looked uncomfortable, shifting in her seat. I rose slowly, deliberately placing my linen napkin neatly beside my untouched plate. I reached into my leather handbag, pulled out the sleek, metallic secondary credit card I had given my mother for dire emergencies, and dropped it right in the center of the table. It landed with a sharp, resonant clack on the polished mahogany. "You're right, Fallon," I whispered, staring straight into my sister's widening eyes. "Let's get rid of the useless people. Let's start the house cleaning right now." My mother frowned, her perfectly manicured eyebrows knitting together in genuine confusion. "Morgan, what on earth are you talking about? Sit down. You're embarrassing us in front of Kendall. You're being far too dramatic over a simple joke." I didn't sit down. I grabbed my coat from the back of the chair. The air in the room had shifted, growing impossibly heavy with a sudden, unspoken tension. They were so used to me swallowing the insults, to bowing my head in silent obedience, to quietly writing the checks to keep the peace. They weren't used to me fighting back. They certainly weren't used to me walking away. I turned my back on them and walked purposefully toward the heavy oak front door. My father yelled my name, his tone shifting rapidly from amused to intensely annoyed. "Morgan, get back here right now!" I didn't look back. I stepped out into the cool evening air, the sound of their confused and angry murmurs fading behind me as the heavy door clicked shut. As I walked down the long, sweeping driveway for which I paid the landscaping fees, a strange, terrifying sense of freedom washed over me. I got into my car, gripped the steering wheel hard, and let out a long, shaky breath I felt like I'd been holding for a decade. The countdown to their downfall had officially begun. How fast would their perfect world burn when the useless person stopped paying for the water? Driving home that night, the vibrant city lights blurred into long streaks of gold and neon red against the dark windshield. The silence inside my car was deafening, leaving far too much room for suppressed memories to flood my conscious mind. It's a funny, tragic thing how the human mind works when the illusion of family loyalty finally shatters. When you finally stop making endless excuses for toxic family members, the past stops looking like a series of unfortunate, accidental misunderstandings. Instead, it starts to look like a very deliberate, carefully curated museum of your own pain. I was walking through the exhibits of my own lifelong exploitation, and every memory made my grip on the steering wheel tighter and my resolve colder. Exhibit A in this museum of misery was my college graduation. I had worked 2 grueling jobs throughout my entire university career, taking overnight shifts in a dusty, dangerous warehouse just to pay my tuition and avoid student loans. I never asked my parents for a single dime. When the day of the commencement ceremony finally arrived, I sat in the sprawling outdoor stadium in my cheap, rented cap and gown. I was surrounded by thousands of joyous families holding giant balloons, vibrant bouquets of flowers, and cheering loudly for their children. I kept checking my phone, refreshing my messages over and over, hoping for a text, a call, any sign that they were in the crowd. Nothing came. The ceremony ended, and I walked back to my dorm room alone. Later that night, as I ate leftover cold pizza in a silent room, I opened social media and discovered the truth. My parents had flown to Miami. Why? Because Fallon was feeling stressed about turning 21 and felt she desperately needed a weekend getaway. They threw her a lavish party on a yacht. When I confronted them weeks later, my mother just waved her hand in that dismissive way of hers. "Oh, Morgan, you always manage on your own. You're so independent. Fallon is fragile. She needs us more. You're the strong one." Strong is the universal family keyword for the child, whose feelings simply don't matter and whose accomplishments require no celebration. Exhibit B was the hospital bill. Years ago, I suffered a sudden, life-threatening ruptured appendix. The pain was agonizing, blindingly intense. I was rushed into emergency surgery in the middle of the night. I woke up hours later, in a sterile, freezing, brightly lit hospital room with absolutely no one by my side. I called my parents, groggy from the anesthesia, and terrified. My father answered, sounding sleepy, and promised they'd come as soon as the sun was up. They never showed. 2 days later, while I was still attached to an IV drip and struggling to sit up, I received an automated fraud alert from my bank. The backup premium credit card I kept hidden at my parents' house for true family emergencies had been maxed out. $10,000 charged to an exclusive, all-inclusive luxury resort in Cancun, Mexico. Fallon had decided the stress of my sudden hospitalization was just too much for her delicate nerves to handle, and she needed a tropical beach vacation to recover from the trauma of her sister being in surgery. When I called my father, crying from pain and betrayal, asking how he could let her steal from me while I was bleeding in a hospital bed, he sighed heavily into the phone. "She's just a kid, Morgan. Don't make a big deal out of it. You make good money at that truck leasing place. You'll just pay it off in a few months. Family helps family." And then there was Exhibit C, the absolute crown jewel of their betrayal, the loan. 3 years ago, Declan's grand dream of a lavish, early retirement turned into a terrifying nightmare when he made a series of incredibly arrogant, terrible investments. He was facing imminent bankruptcy. He called me into his dark, oak-paneled study, broke down in actual tears, and begged for my financial rescue. He told me he would lose the beautiful house, the prestigious country club membership, and his pride in the community. I felt a surge of filial duty. I emptied my entire life savings, $50,000 wired directly to his aggressive creditors to save him from total financial ruin. He hugged me tight, called me his savior, his miracle girl, and promised to pay back every single penny. But barely a month later, during a large family dinner with our distant relatives, an aunt asked me what I did for a living these days. Before I could even open my mouth to explain my rise to regional director, my father cut in with a dismissive, smug smile. "Oh, she works down at the leasing yards with the mechanics. It's a humble living, mostly manual labor. Not everyone is cut out for the sophisticated corporate world like our Fallon." I had just handed this man $50,000 of my hard-earned money to save him from living on the street, and he was still treating me like the embarrassing dirt under his polished shoes in front of our entire family. For years, I had swallowed these bitter insults. I rationalized their toxic behavior. I convinced myself that being the financial pillar of the family meant I inherently had value. I thought if I just paid enough bills, fixed enough disasters, and solved enough of their problems, they would eventually look at me with the same unconditional adoration they showered on Fallon. But tonight, that pathetic illusion had finally shattered into a million irreparable pieces. I wasn't their beloved daughter. I was their safety net, their permanent scapegoat, their endless ATM. I pulled into my secure apartment complex, parked in my designated spot, and killed the engine. The dashboard went dark, leaving me in the quiet shadows of the parking garage. I pulled out my phone and opened my secure banking app. I stared at the numbers glowing brightly on the screen. Over the past 4 years, between the generous monthly allowances, the constant emergency bailouts, the maxed-out credit card bills, and the hidden mortgage supplements, I had transferred them over $340,000. $340,000. That was the staggering price of their conditional affection. That was the exact cost of being called a useless person. I leaned my head back against the leather headrest, and a slow, bitter smile spread across my face. I was so incredibly tired of playing the strong, silent, reliable provider for a family that clearly hated me. They wanted to see what a truly useless person looked like. I was going to show them. I was going to give them a front-row seat to their own financial apocalypse. Are you ready to see what happens when the loyal scapegoat finally decides to bite back and burn the whole pasture to the ground? The next morning, I woke up feeling dangerously lucid. There was no emotional hangover of guilt. No lingering, desperate urge to call my mother and apologize for walking out and ruining her perfect dinner party. Instead, there was just a cold, sharp, and very methodical focus taking over my mind. I walked into my kitchen, poured a cup of strong black coffee, and sat at the granite island, watching the bustling city wake up through my floor-to-ceiling window. The sky was clear, and my conscience was even clearer. At exactly 8:00 a.m., my phone began vibrating aggressively on the counter. The caller ID showed my Aunt Naomi's name, my mother's older sister. Naomi was the ultimate flying monkey in our family dynamic. A bitter, wealthy woman who thrived on manufacturing family drama and took immense pleasure in judging everyone from her pedestal. If my parents were the master architects of my lifelong misery, Naomi was their most dedicated and vocal contractor. I took a deep breath, answered the call, and put it on speaker, setting the device next to my coffee mug. "Morgan," Naomi barked immediately, skipping any form of standard morning greeting. "What in the hell is wrong with your brain? Your mother called me last night, crying her eyes out. She said you threw a massive, childish tantrum in front of Fallon's important business friend and stormed out of the house like a spoiled brat." Do you have any idea how deeply embarrassing that is for your poor sister? I took a slow, deliberate sip of my hot coffee. Aunt Naomi, were you physically present at the dinner last night? Did you happen to hear the exact words Fallon used to describe me? Oh, please, stop playing the victim. It's exhausting, she scoffed loudly, her voice dripping with extreme condescension. Fallon is under massive pressure, building her luxury PR brand from the ground up. Sometimes she speaks out of turn when she's stressed. You know this perfectly well. You're the older sister. You're supposed to be the mature one, not some sensitive, jealous brat. Now you listen to me very carefully. Fallon is deeply humiliated. Kendall thinks your family is unstable. Fallon desperately needs to host a redemption dinner for Kendall's elite social circle this weekend to save her professional image. You need to wire her $15,000 by noon today to cover the premium catering, floral arrangements, and venue rental. It's the least you can do after you intentionally ruined her evening and endangered her career. I stared at the phone, truly marveling at the sheer insanity radiating from the speaker. Because I was horribly insulted in my own parents' home, I was now expected to pay a $15,000 financial penalty to the exact person who insulted me. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of this family was genuinely staggering. I'm not sending her a single dime, Naomi, I said, keeping my voice incredibly even and devoid of any emotion. Naomi gasped loudly, a sharp, dramatic intake of breath that sounded like I had physically slapped her. Excuse me? You listen to me, you little girl. You may make decent money playing with your dirty little trucks, but you owe this family your life. You owe your parents everything for raising you and putting up with your difficult personality. If you don't send that money right now, you are going to be kicked out of this family faster than you can blink. We will disown you. Promises? Promises. I muttered dryly and reached over to press the red end call button. Less than a minute later, a new voicemail notification popped up on my screen from Fallon. I hit play, leaning back in my chair. Her voice was shrill, panicked, and tinged with an ugly, demanding entitlement that made my skin crawl. Morgan, you had better transfer that money to my account this very second. Stop being such a pathetic, selfish, jealous loser. Kendall thinks we're fighting now and it's ruining my perfect aesthetic image. You fix this right now, or I swear to God, I will make sure Dad never speaks to you again and you're banned from the house. I calmly deleted the voicemail. The entitlement was suffocating, but instead of hurting me, it just poured premium gasoline on the fire burning in my chest. Just as I was putting my phone down to wash my mug, it rang again. This time, the screen showed Uncle Wes, my father's younger brother. Wes was the designated black sheep of the older generation. He owned a small, gritty auto body shop on the industrial outskirts of town. A man with permanent grease under his fingernails, a loud laugh, and zero tolerance for country club nonsense. He was the only person in the entire extended family who ever treated me like a respectable human being, probably because we were both considered the blue-collar disappointments of the Ashworth lineage. Hey, kiddo, he said, his voice raspy but undeniably warm. Heard through the grapevine you caused quite a stir at the royal palace last night. News travels fast in this kingdom. I sighed, rubbing my temples to ward off a headache. Naomi just called and demanded I pay a $15,000 fine for hurting Fallon's fragile feelings. Wes let out a low, rumbling laugh that sounded exactly like a heavy diesel engine starting up. Sounds about right for that crew. Listen, Morgan, I'm not calling to lecture you or tell you to apologize. I'm calling to warn you about something. I was over at the country club yesterday afternoon fixing the busted alternator on your dad's custom golf cart. Happened to overhear Declan holding court with some of his high society snob friends on the patio. Talking about what? I asked, a sudden, heavy sinking feeling developing in my stomach. The house, Wes said quietly, the humor leaving his voice entirely. Declan was boasting to anyone who would listen. He told his golf buddies that Fallon bought them the huge estate. Said her PR business is booming so massively that she paid off their entire mortgage in cash and is taking care of them in their old age. He practically called you a useless freeloader who just borrows their cars and eats their food. My blood ran ice cold instantly. The house. Years ago, when Declan was drowning in terrible debt, he had secretly taken out a massive, high-interest second mortgage on the estate. When he inevitably defaulted, the bank was preparing to foreclose and evict them. To save them from public humiliation, I had quietly used my extensive commercial banking connections and had an asset management firm in which I secretly owned a 90% majority stake, legally buy out the distressed debt. I was technically, legally their landlord. I paid the annual property taxes. I paid for the expensive roof maintenance. And they were walking around telling everyone that Fallon, the girl who couldn't afford a decent cup of coffee without my premium credit card, was their generous savior. They said Fallon bought it, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. Yeah, kid, Wes sighed heavily. They're living in a complete fantasy world, Morgan. And they're using your blood, sweat, and tears to build the castle walls. You need to cut the cord. Cut it now, before they bleed you completely dry and leave you with nothing. Thanks, Uncle Wes, I said, my voice hardening into solid steel. I'm getting the sharpest scissors ready right now. I hung up the phone. The initial shock had passed completely, leaving behind a pristine, razor-sharp clarity that felt almost euphoric. They really thought they owned me. They thought my money was just an endless, natural resource they had a divine right to exploit forever. As they spat on the miner, they were about to find out exactly who owned whom. I opened my laptop, pulled up my financial directory, and started drafting an urgent email to my wealth manager. How fast do you think a massive house of cards collapses when you violently rip out the foundation? I picked up my phone and called the central dispatch hub, telling my executive assistant I was taking 2 emergency personal days. It was the first time in 3 straight years I had ever taken off from work. But today, I had a very different kind of fleet to dismantle. I walked into my bedroom and changed into a tailored, black designer power suit. I wanted to look exactly like the ruthless, successful corporate businesswoman they constantly claimed I wasn't. I wanted my armor on. By 10:00 a.m., I was sitting in the plush, mahogany-paneled corner office of Clifton, the senior branch manager of my primary financial institution, and my dedicated personal wealth advisor. Clifton was a stern, highly intelligent man in his 50s, meticulously organized and fiercely protective of his high-net-worth clients. Over the years, he had watched with quiet, professional disapproval as I authorized transfer after massive transfer to my family's checking accounts. He never overstepped, but I always knew he hated watching me drain my assets for them. I slid a thick, heavy manila folder across his polished desk. Clifton, I need to make some significant changes to my portfolio immediately. Today, Clifton adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and opened the folder. He scanned the highlighted documents, his eyebrows slowly climbing higher and higher up his forehead as he read. He looked up at me, his expression deathly serious. Morgan, are you absolutely certain about this course of action? If we execute these specific orders today, we are talking about a complete and irreversible financial severance. I'm looking at the joint emergency reserve accounts, the 3 secondary premium credit cards, the auto-pay system for the estate's property taxes, and the standing wire transfer for the $10,000 monthly allowance to your father's primary checking account. I'm certain, I said, my voice remarkably steady and cold. Cut them all off. Clifton took off his glasses and leaned forward, clasping his hands tightly on the desk. Morgan, as your fiduciary advisor, I need to explicitly warn you of the immediate consequences. All 3 credit cards are currently carrying revolving balances that are approaching their $25,000 maximum limits. Once you legally remove yourself as the primary guarantor, the liability transfers entirely to the secondary cardholders if they attempt to continue their use. But more importantly, as they have no verifiable personal income to support these massive credit lines, the cards will be immediately frozen by the fraud department. If you stop the monthly cash transfers, their checking accounts will likely be overdrawn in a matter of days given their lavish spending habits. If you pull your name from these guarantee forms, they will be facing a severe financial default in less than 48 hours. I gazed out the large, floor-to-ceiling glass window of his office, watching the busy, chaotic street below. People hustling to work, earning a living. That's not a default, Clifton, I said quietly, turning my gaze back to him. That's just returning them to their true, actual market value. A small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of Clifton's stern mouth. He understood. Very well. Let's begin the liquidation process. For the next 2 solid hours, we methodically severed every single financial artery that kept my family's fake luxury lifestyle alive. I signed document after document, initialing page after page. With every stroke of the heavy ink pen, a massive physical weight lifted from my shoulders. I permanently canceled the auto payment for my mother's exclusive country club membership. I legally withdrew my financial backing from my father's leased custom golf cart. I froze all 3 premium credit cards, permanently locking them out of my credit line. I canceled the $10,000 monthly wire transfer with immediate effect. There's one more major item, I said, sliding one final, crisp piece of paper toward him. The asset management firm, M Logistics Capital, the corporate entity that holds the deed to their house. Clifton nodded slowly, his sharp eyes scanning the legal paper. Yes, the holding company you established specifically to purchase their distressed mortgage from the previous lender. They are currently legally renting the property from your firm, though I note here in the ledger you have never once charged them a single penny of rent in 4 years. That changes today, I said, feeling a dark, powerful sense of satisfaction settle deep in my chest. I want a legally binding notice of rent arrears drawn up immediately. I want it sent via certified mail this afternoon. If they want to live in a mansion they proudly claim Fallon bought, they can start paying the current market rate for it. Send the formal notice directly to my father, requiring a signature upon delivery. Clifton stamped the final document with a loud, authoritative, and satisfying thud. It's done. Morgan. The severance is legally complete. By early this afternoon, all banking systems will be globally updated. Their luxury cards will be declined at the point of sale. Their auto payments will bounce for insufficient funds. The safety net is officially gone. I stood up, smoothed the jacket of my suit, and shook Clifton's hand firmly. Thank you, Clifton, for everything. Good luck, Morgan, he said quietly, a look of genuine respect in his eyes. Stay strong for the blowback. I walked out of the quiet, air-conditioned bank and into the bright, blinding midday sun. The city air tasted sweeter, cleaner. The crushing burden of being the good, dutiful, useful daughter was finally gone, replaced by the thrilling, electric anticipation of pure justice. Every signature I had just made was a heavy steel door slamming shut and locking. The financial traps were set. The timers were running down fast, and all I had to do now was sit back and wait for the spectacular collapse. The rest of the afternoon stretched out in a strange, surreal, almost dreamlike quiet. The silence radiating from my phone was deafening. My family was so accustomed to me caving before noon after any argument. Usually by this time of day, I would have sent a long, pleading apology text, followed closely by a large wire transfer to smooth things over quickly and buy my way back into their good graces. They were probably sitting in their large, sun-drenched living room right now, sipping iced tea, laughing together about how I was just throwing a pathetic tantrum and would come crawling back with my checkbook wide open by dinner time. I needed to stay incredibly focused. I couldn't just sit in my apartment alone and let the silence play games with my mind. I drove my car out to one of my company's massive secondary maintenance yards on the outskirts of the city. The familiar, harsh smell of dark engine grease, hot summer asphalt, and heavy diesel fuel hit me the second I stepped out of the vehicle. This was my real world. These massive, towering commercial trucks, the burly mechanics yelling at each other over the deafening roar of engines revving the dirt, the sweat, and the grime. This is exactly where my money came from. Every dollar my family casually spent on expensive champagne and European designer handbags was earned right here in the muck by the useless daughter they were so deeply ashamed of. I walked the long concrete line, inspecting a row of newly leased industrial vehicles, chatting easily with the yard manager about maintenance schedules and tire rotations. The hard physical reality of the active yard helped to beat back the persistent, nagging ghosts of guilt. Because that's the truly insidious thing about deeply toxic families. They condition you so incredibly well from childhood that even when you finally stand up to their abuse, you feel like you're committing a horrible crime against nature. A tiny, lingering voice in the back of my head kept whispering, "Are you being too harsh? They're your parents. It's your sister. You have plenty of money." But then I looked at the rough calluses on my palms. I thought of the Cancun vacation photos on social media while I was bleeding and terrified in a sterile hospital bed. I thought of the $50,000 bailout funds and the cruel mechanics gibe that followed only a few weeks later. I mentally crushed that little voice of guilt until it was nothing but fine dust blowing in the wind. At exactly 2:14 p.m., my phone buzzed loudly in my pocket. It was an automated SMS alert from the banking app. I had deliberately set up instant notifications for any attempted transactions on the frozen cards before I fully disabled my administrative access, just so I could personally monitor the fallout in real time. I pulled the phone from my pocket, the screen glowing under the harsh sunlight. Transaction declined. Platinum card ending in 4092. Amount, $5,000. Merchant, Hermes Boutique downtown. I stared at the glowing screen, a genuine, loud laugh bubbling up from deep inside my chest. Fallon. She was actually trying to drop $5,000 on a luxury handbag less than 24 hours after telling me to my face that I was useless and aggressively demanding $15,000 for a party. She honestly thought she could go on a massive shopping spree with my money to soothe her slightly bruised ego. A few seconds later, another alert popped up on the screen. Transaction declined. Platinum card ending in 4092. Amount: $5,000. Merchant: Hermes Boutique downtown. Reason: account frozen. She had actually tried to run it twice. I could picture the scene perfectly in my mind. Fallon standing at the pristine glass counter, her face turning bright red as the polite, polished sales associate apologetically handed the metal card back to her in front of other wealthy patrons. The sheer, crushing embarrassment she must have been feeling in that moment, in front of the elite socialites she so desperately wanted to impress. The perfect PR facade was cracking wide open. Then the third alert came. But this one was from a different account entirely. Insufficient funds. Auto draft to Riverside Country Club. Amount: $1,200. Account: Declan Ashworth Primary Checking. Because I had permanently canceled the massive monthly deposit that morning, my father's primary checking account had just forcibly bounced his monthly country club membership dues. The heavy dominoes were officially beginning to fall. The glittering, fake empire built entirely on my sweat was crumbling in real time. I leaned my back against the massive, thick tire of an 1.8 wheeler, the hot afternoon sun beating down on my face. The hunt had officially begun. How long do you think it takes for deep entitlement to curdle into pure, unfiltered panic? The storm officially broke exactly 10 minutes later. My phone started vibrating violently and relentlessly in my pocket. I didn't even need to look at the screen to know exactly who it was. The barrage of missed calls came in a rapid, desperate succession. 3 missed calls from Fallon, 2 missed calls from my mother, 5 missed calls from my father. They were finally realizing that the family ATM wasn't just temporarily out of order, it had been fully repossessed and removed from the premises. I let it ring. I walked slowly into the cluttered, air-conditioned office of the yard supervisor. I poured myself a cup of cheap, bitter breakroom coffee into a styrofoam cup and leaned back in the worn leather desk chair, watching my phone screen light up again and again. It was a truly fascinating psychological experiment to watch their stages of grief rapidly manifest through a series of missed calls. First came the confusion, then the intense frustration, and now the absolute, undeniable panic. Finally, a long text message from my mother came through. "Morgan, the bank's system is glitching terribly. Fallon's card was just declined at the boutique, and your father just got an incredibly embarrassing call from the country club treasurer about failed payments. Call Clifton at the bank and fix this immediately before it causes a scene." She still honestly thought it was a technical error. She still couldn't conceive of a universe where I would deliberately and decisively cut them off from my wealth. I took a slow sip of my bitter coffee, typed out a single, decisive sentence, and sent it. "It's not a glitch." 30 seconds later, the phone rang again. It was Declan. I decided it was finally time to face the music. I pressed the green accept button and put the phone to my ear. "Morgan!" My father bellowed into the receiver, his voice echoing loudly in the small office even without speakerphone on. He was furiously angry, the kind of red-faced, sputtering, vein-popping rage he usually reserved for incompetent waiters or bad drivers. "What in the hell is going on here? I just spoke to Clifton at the bank, and he gave me some ridiculous nonsense about guarantor authorizations being permanently revoked. You will reactivate the credit cards right now. Do you have any earthly idea how deeply humiliating this was for Fallon at the boutique today? I imagine it was about as humiliating as being called useless in front of a guest while paying for the expensive dinner you were eating." I replied, my voice dangerously calm, completely devoid of any heated emotion. Declan stammered, clearly taken aback by my icy, unwavering tone. You're doing this on purpose? Over a stupid joke at dinner? Have you completely lost your mind, Morgan? You can't just cut us off like this. You're acting like a petulant, spoiled child." "A child?" I repeated, feeling the cold, hard fury crystallize in my veins. "No, Dad, I'm acting like a savvy businesswoman who is finally liquidating a terrible, sinking investment. You all made it very clear last night that my presence in this family is nothing but a burden. Fallon said we should get rid of the useless people. I agreed with her assessment. I'm just cleaning house." "You listen to me," Declan snarled, abandoning the thin pretense of fatherly disappointment and moving straight into aggressive bullying. "You owe us. We gave you life. We raised you in a good home. You will call Clifton and you will fix this right now. Or, I swear to God, you are no longer part of this family. I let out a soft, genuine laugh that echoed in the quiet office. Dad, you can't fire someone who just quit. The bank accounts remain permanently closed. The monthly transfers are gone for good. My money is finally seeing all of you, for what you really are useless. I hung up the phone before he could even draw a breath to respond. My heart was pounding against my ribs, not from fear, but from a massive, electric surge of pure adrenaline. I had done it. The heavy iron chain had been broken. The phone screen lit up once more. It was Fallon. I calmly declined the incoming call. Then a long text message from her came through. Desperate, vicious, and venomous. You think you're so incredibly clever? You think you can embarrass me in public? Mom and Dad are furious with you. We're having a big family barbecue this Sunday with Aunt Naomi and the rest of the relatives. Dad says if you don't show up, apologize on your knees, and fix the cards, you are nothing to us. We will tell everyone exactly what a selfish, greedy, delusional person you are. I stared at the glowing message. They were cornered, desperate animals, and their immediate instinct was to publicly shame me into total submission. They wanted to drag me in front of the extended family, the ultimate gathering of flying monkeys, to tear me apart and force me back into financial compliance by sheer force of will. They honestly thought a public humiliation of my character would make me cry and open my wallet. I typed my response slowly, savoring each letter. I'll be there. I'll bring dessert. I locked my phone and stood up from the desk. They wanted a dramatic spectacle. They wanted to expose me in front of the whole family. Fine. I would give them a spectacular performance they would never, ever forget. Because what they didn't know was that I wasn't coming to apologize. I was coming to burn their fake empire to the ground. Sunday afternoon arrived with a bright, scorching sun that felt entirely inappropriate for the absolute takedown I was about to perform. I drove my modest sedan up the long, winding, immaculately paved driveway of the estate. The sprawling green lawns were perfectly manicured, a landscaping service that automatically billed my corporate account $800 every month. The irony of it all was thick enough to cut with a knife. They were hosting a grand family gathering to publicly humiliate my character, using a pristine backdrop that I had entirely funded. I parked my car near the massive iron gates, taking a deep, steadying breath before I got out. The air was thick with the rich, delicious smell of smoked brisket and expensive cedar wood burning on the huge custom-built barbecue pit. As I walked around the side of the sprawling brick house toward the back patio, I could hear the loud, boisterous chatter of my extended family. The flying monkeys had assembled in full force. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and various family friends stood around holding crystal glasses filled with imported champagne, laughing and enjoying the lavish lifestyle they all believed my father had built from the ground up. As I stepped onto the stone patio, the vibrant chatter didn't stop immediately. It slowly tapered off, like a breaking wave receding on the sand. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. The collective judgment of the Ashworth family was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Seated in the center of the patio, perfectly positioned on a plush outdoor sofa, was Fallon. She was wearing a stunning designer white linen dress, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, playing the part of the traumatized, abused younger sister to perfection. My mother, Blair, immediately stopped pouring drinks and shot me a venomous glare, her face tight with a mixture of rage and deep embarrassment. Declan, my father, stood by the grill, holding a pair of silver tongs like a weapon. His jaw clenched so tightly, I thought his teeth might crack. But it was Aunt Naomi who made the first move. She stormed across the patio, her heels clicking aggressively against the stone. She stopped inches from my face, jabbing a sharp, well-manicured finger directly at my chest. "How dare you show your face here after what you did to your sister?" Naomi hissed, her voice just loud enough for the entire backyard to hear. The remaining whispers fell completely silent. Everyone was watching the show. "You are a spiteful, jealous, and deeply disturbed woman, Morgan. Fallon has been crying for 2 days straight. She told us everything. She told us how you tried to steal her business funds out of pure malicious envy because you're stuck working in a dirty truck yard while she's building a massive PR empire." I looked past Naomi's aggressively jabbing finger and met Fallon's eyes. Fallon let out a dramatic, shuddering sob, hiding her face in her hands as a cousin rubbed her back for comfort. She had actually concocted a narrative where I was stealing from her. The sheer pathological delusion of it was almost impressive. "You need to apologize to her right now," Naomi demanded, her voice echoing off the brick walls of the house. "You will get on your knees. you will beg her for forgiveness, and you will give back the money. You froze. Or you can turn around, walk back down that driveway, and never consider yourself a part of this family again. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't offer a single word of defense or apology. I just stood there in the center of the patio, surrounded by dozens of people who were staring at me like I was a repulsive insect that had crawled onto their expensive outdoor rug. Near the garden gate, I saw Uncle Wes leaning against a stone pillar. He was holding a cheap beer, watching me intently, giving me a slow, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. He knew the storm was coming. I reached into my large leather handbag and pulled out a huge, heavy, thick, manila folder. I held it up in the sunlight. My mother let out a sharp, mocking scoff, crossing her arms defensively over her chest. "What is that, Morgan?" she sneered, her voice dripping with venom. "What ridiculous papers are you trying to show us? Are you going to show us a doctor's note, a certificate proving you finally lost your mind?" I smiled. It was a cold, empty smile that didn't reach my eyes. "No, Mother," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent patio, making sure every single aunt, uncle, and cousin could hear every syllable. "This isn't a medical file. This is the birth certificate of Fallon's fake career." I unclasped the heavy folder and pulled out a thick stack of bank statements, credit card ledgers, and verified wire transfer receipts. I had Clifton print everything on official bank letterhead, fully notarized and sealed. There was no room for denial, no room for gaslighting. There was only the cold, hard, indisputable truth in black ink. I didn't hand the papers to my parents. I walked straight past Aunt Naomi and handed the first stack directly to my cousin Sarah, the biggest gossip in the entire family. I handed another stack to Uncle Robert. I tossed a third stack right onto the glass coffee table in front of Fallon. "What are you doing?" Declan roared, dropping his grilling tongs. The metal clattered loudly against the stone. He lunged to grab the papers, but Uncle Wes smoothly stepped out of the shadows and blocked his path, putting one heavy, grease-stained hand on Declan's chest. "Let the girl talk, Declan," Wes rumbled, his voice low and dangerous. I turned to the crowd. Everyone was staring at the papers in their hands, their eyes scanning the highlighted lines. The confusion on their faces was slowly melting into deep, utter shock. "Let's talk about stealing," I said, my voice ringing out in the graveyard silence of the backyard. "Aunt Naomi, you're wearing a beautiful floral silk dress today. It looks incredibly expensive. In fact, it cost $800. If you look at page 4 of that packet, you'll see the exact boutique charge made on a platinum card that I personally guarantee and paid off from my personal checking account." Naomi's mouth fell open. She looked down at her dress, then back at the paper, her face losing all color. She looked like she was going to be sick. "And this magnificent family barbecue," I continued, gesturing to the lavish spread of expensive food and alcohol, the premium brisket, the imported champagne, the rented outdoor furniture paid for with a $3,000 wire transfer I sent to my mother last month. "Every sip of wine you are drinking right now was bought with the money I earn working at that dirty truck yard." The crowd began to murmur. People awkwardly set their champagne glasses down on tables, suddenly feeling as if the crystal was burning their hands. Fallon leaped up from the sofa, her face bright red with panic. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "She's lying," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "These are fake. She forged these documents because she's obsessed with ruining my life. I make my own money. I have luxury clients." I looked at my younger sister, feeling nothing but a profound sense of pity for the pathetic corner she had backed herself into. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I Bluetooth connected it to the massive outdoor sound system my father had installed last summer, another item I had quietly paid for. "You make your own money?" I asked, raising one eyebrow. I tapped the screen. "Let's listen to a voicemail you left me 3 days ago, Fallon." The speakers crackled to life, and Fallon's shrill, demanding voice boomed across the entire estate, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Morgan, you had better transfer that $15,000 to my account this very second. Stop being such a pathetic, selfish, jealous loser. Kendall thinks we're fighting now and it's ruining my perfect aesthetic image. You fix this right now, or I swear to God I will make sure Dad never speaks to you again." I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like it could crush the stone patio into dust. $10,000, I said quietly. That was the monthly allowance I have been paying to keep the lights on in this house and to bankroll Fallon's imaginary PR firm. Over the last 4 years, I have transferred exactly $340,000 to this family, and in return, I was told at Friday's dinner that I was useless. I was told I was the fat that needed to be trimmed. I looked at my relatives. The flying monkeys were completely grounded. Aunt Naomi was staring at the floor, utterly humiliated. The cousins were whispering furiously to each other, looking at Fallon and my parents with pure disgust. The illusion of the wealthy, successful Ashworth family was shattered into a million irreparable pieces. My mother, Blair, started to cry real tears. Now. "Morgan, please," she whimpered, reaching for me with her hands outstretched. "We can talk about this inside. Please don't do this in front of everyone." I took a step back, out of her reach. "There's nothing left to talk about, Mother. The useless person is officially resigning from her position." The backyard was dead silent, save for the sound of Fallon hyperventilating on the couch. But I wasn't quite done. I turned slowly and looked toward the main driveway, where Fallon's gleaming, massive luxury SUV was parked directly on the pristine lawn, intentionally displayed for all to admire. Just as I fixed my eyes on the vehicle, the heavy, unmistakable sound of squealing air brakes echoed down the street. A massive, heavy-duty commercial tow truck, painted in the bright yellow and black colors of my leasing company, slowly turned into the grand driveway. Its amber warning lights flashed brightly, casting a rhythmic, warning glow over the expensive landscaping. The entire family turned to watch in stunned silence as the huge truck expertly backed up toward Fallon's SUV. A burly driver in a high-visibility vest jumped out, holding a thick metal clipboard, and began unreeling the heavy steel winch cable. "What is going on?" Fallon shrieked, scrambling across the patio toward the driveway. "Hey, get away from my car! What are you doing?" The driver completely ignored her, hooking the heavy steel chains under the front axle of the luxury vehicle. "It's not your car, Fallon," I said, walking slowly toward the driveway, the crowd of relatives following me like a stunned audience in a theater. "It's a commercial fleet vehicle owned by my logistics company. I leased it internally under my name and allowed you to drive it. But since you decided I'm useless, I figured you wouldn't want to be seen driving a vehicle provided by someone so pathetic. I canceled the internal lease this morning. The vehicle is being repossessed for violation of the authorized driver terms." Fallon stopped dead in her tracks. Her legs literally gave out from under her. She collapsed onto the manicured lawn, screaming and sobbing hysterically, begging the driver to stop. But the hydraulic winch whirred to life, and the front tires of the massive SUV were brutally lifted off the ground. The ultimate symbol of her fake, manufactured status was being hauled away in front of every single person she had ever lied to. Declan's face went from pale white to a dangerous, alarming shade of purple. He stalked toward me, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. He looked like he wanted to hit me, but Uncle Wes was right behind him, a silent, menacing shadow, making sure he didn't try any funny business. "You ungrateful, spiteful brat," Declan spat, his voice trembling with a rage so deep he could barely form the words. "You think you can come onto my property, embarrass my family, and steal your sister's car? Get off my land. Get off my property, right now, before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing." I stood my ground. I looked at the huge, sprawling brick mansion. I looked at the imported slate roof I had paid to repair, the custom windows, the grand entryway. I felt a surge of pure, unfiltered power rush through my veins. "Your property?" I asked, tilting my head slightly, my voice eerily calm against the backdrop of Fallon's hysterical sobs. "Yes, my property," Declan roared. I reached deep into the manila folder and pulled out one final document. It was printed on thick, legal-grade paper with the official embossed seal of the county clerk's office. I held it out to him. "You might want to read the name on the deed, Declan," I said quietly. "Years ago, when the bank was about to throw you out on the street for defaulting on your massive second mortgage, a private asset management firm stepped in and bought out your distressed debt. You proudly told Aunt Naomi and your golf buddies that Fallon paid it off with her massive PR earnings." Declan stared at the paper in my hand, refusing to take it. His breathing became shallow, erratic. "The firm is called M Logistics Capital," I continued, my voice rising over the sound of the tow truck securing the SUV. "I am the sole founder, the CEO, and the majority shareholder of that firm. You don't own this house, Dad. You haven't owned this house for the last 4 years. You're a tenant, and unfortunately, since you failed to pay the market rate rent that was formally established yesterday, I had my lawyers draw this up." I pressed the paper directly against his chest until he instinctively grabbed it. It's a formal 30-day notice of eviction and foreclosure, I said. You have exactly 1 month to pack up your fake lives and vacate my property. If you so much as damage a single light switch on your way out, I will sue you for everything you don't have. Declan's hands shook violently as he read the legal document. The reality of the situation crashed down on him like a collapsing building. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him looking hollow, old, and utterly defeated. My mother, Blair, let out a pathetic, wailing shriek and sank into a patio chair, clutching her chest as if her heart were actually breaking. The relatives began to back away silently and awkwardly. The show was over. The truth was out, and it was utterly ugly. Aunt Naomi was already walking quickly toward her car, not saying a single word of goodbye to my parents. The flying monkeys were scattering, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of the Ashworth Empire. Uncle Wes walked over to me, said nothing, but just placed a heavy, warm hand on my shoulder, gave it a firm, proud squeeze, and walked away toward his old pickup truck. I looked at my parents, standing in the ruins of their own making. I looked at Fallon, sobbing on the lawn as the tow truck drove away with her fake persona. I turned my back on all of it. I walked to my modest sedan and got in. I started the engine. As I drove down the winding driveway for the very last time, the deep, profound silence radiating from the estate behind me was the most beautiful symphony I had ever heard. The massive collapse of their fake empire didn't happen overnight, but it unraveled with brutal, predictable efficiency. It had been 2 months since the explosive Sunday barbecue, and my life had completely transformed. The constant, suffocating pressure in my chest was gone. The endless anxiety about incoming bills, the dread of looking at my phone, the nauseating feeling of being used, it had all evaporated, replaced by a deep sense of peace. I was sleeping through the night for the first time in a decade. My savings account was growing at a staggering rate, no longer being siphoned off to fund country club dinners and designer handbags. I was sitting at a high-end steakhouse downtown, enjoying a quiet, incredibly expensive steak lunch with Clifton, my wealth manager. We were celebrating a massive new commercial contract my leasing division had just secured. You look remarkably well, Morgan, Clifton said, raising his glass of sparkling water. The stress seems to have melted away completely. I smiled, cutting into my steak. I feel lighter, Clifton. It's amazing how much energy you have when you stop carrying other people's deliberate mistakes on your back. Clifton chuckled softly, setting down his glass. Speaking of mistakes, I assume you received the final legal notification about the civil suit your father attempted to file against you. I rolled my eyes, taking a sip of my wine. Yes, my lawyer sent me the summary on Tuesday. In a desperate, clumsy bid to maintain their lavish lifestyle, Declan had tried to sue me. He hired a cheap, aggressive lawyer and tried to argue that the money I had given them over the years constituted a verbal contract for lifetime support, and that my sudden withdrawal of funds caused intentional emotional and financial distress. He also tried to contest the legal ownership of the estate, claiming I had manipulated him into signing the deed over to my holding company under extreme duress. It was a pathetic, laughable attempt at intimidation. The judge threw the entire case out during the first preliminary hearing, Clifton said, shaking his head in amusement. Your father's lawyer was practically reprimanded for bringing such a frivolous, unsubstantiated claim to court. The documentation you had them sign over the years was ironclad. The financial severance is permanent, legal, and practical. What's the current status of the property? I asked, genuinely curious. I had completely handed over the eviction process to a third-party property management company, so I wouldn't have to deal with my family directly. They vacated the premises on day 28 of the notice, Clifton replied, pulling up a file on his tablet. The property managers inspected the estate. They left it in surprisingly immaculate condition. I suspect they were terrified you would actually follow through on your threat to sue them for damages. The house has already been put on the luxury rental market, and we have 2 very strong corporate applicants willing to pay above your asking price. And my family? Where did they go? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. I didn't feel malice, but I didn't feel pity, either. It was just a morbid curiosity about the mechanics of their downfall. Clifton adjusted his glasses, reading from his notes. From what the research firm gathered for the legal proceedings, Declan and Blair were forced to rent a very small, 2-bedroom apartment on the industrial east side of town. Their country club memberships were formally revoked due to severe non-payment. The remaining vehicles they owned were voluntarily surrendered to avoid further repossession marks on their ruined credit histories. "And Fallon?" I asked. Clifton offered a tight, grim smile. The luxury PR firm officially dissolved, as it apparently had exactly 0 paying clients. "According to the employment verifications we ran for the lawsuit, your sister is currently working 35 hours a week as a hostess at a mid-tier chain restaurant downtown." I leaned back in my chair, gazing out the restaurant window at the bustling city streets. The power shift was absolutely total. My entire life, I had been the one in grease-stained clothes, working the grueling shifts, silently begging for a crumb of validation while they lived like royalty. Now the natural order of the universe had violently corrected itself. Right on cue, my phone vibrated quietly on the white tablecloth. I glanced at the screen. It was an incoming text from an unsaved number, but I recognized the frantic, demanding tone immediately. It was Fallon. She had obviously gotten a new, cheap phone after her expensive plan was disconnected. "Morgan, I know you hate us, but the apartment's electricity bill is due today, and they're going to shut it off. Dad's Social Security check doesn't clear until next week. I need you to send me $200. Just this once, please. I'm at the grocery store and my card was declined for food." I stared at the message for a long, quiet moment. A year ago, I would have panicked. I would have felt a nauseating wave of guilt wash over me, picturing my parents sitting in a dark, hot apartment. I would have immediately opened my banking app and transferred $1,000 just to be safe, just to be the good, reliable daughter. But today I felt nothing but cold, hard reality. They were adults. They had made a lifetime of terrible, selfish, and cruel choices. And for the first time in their lives, they were being forced to actually sit in the uncomfortable consequences. I tapped the screen, opening the message. I didn't type a response. I simply let the read receipt activate, showing her exactly what time I looked at her desperate plea. Then I calmly blocked the number, put the phone back in my purse, and continued eating my expensive, peaceful lunch. They had finally learned exactly who the useless person in the family was. But as I sat there, in the quiet luxury of my own making, a deeper question lingered in the back of my mind. Did destroying their fake reality actually make me happy? Or did it just make me free? The real closure didn't come in a courtroom, and it didn't come from watching my bank account grow. It came nearly 6 months later, in the most mundane, incredibly ordinary setting imaginable. I was walking through the aisles of a massive, wholesale discount supermarket on a Tuesday night, picking up supplies for a charity barbecue. My logistics company was hosting for the local mechanics union. The harsh, incredibly bright fluorescent lights hummed gently overhead, illuminating endless pallets of bulk paper towels and oversized cereal boxes. I turned down the canned goods aisle, pushing my heavy metal cart, and froze. Standing a few feet away, intensely comparing the prices of 2 different generic brands of canned soup, was my mother. The contrast was shocking, almost unbelievable. Blair Ashworth, the woman who used to refuse to leave the massive estate unless she was wearing a silk blouse and full designer makeup, looked completely unrecognizable. She was wearing a pilled, oversized gray sweater and cheap, loose-fitting sweatpants. Her hair, usually perfectly styled by an expensive salon, was pulled back in a messy, uneven clip, showing severe gray roots. She looked 10 years older, her shoulders slumped under the heavy, crushing weight of real-world financial stress. She turned her head slightly and saw me. The can of generic soup slipped from her fingers and clattered loudly on the linoleum floor, rolling under a metal shelf. We stared at each other under the harsh, unforgiving light of the discount store. I stood tall, wearing a chic, tailored coat over a high-end cashmere sweater, holding a perfectly crafted leather handbag. The physical manifestation of our inverted roles was stark, brutal, and undeniable. She bent down slowly, retrieved the dented can of soup, and placed it carefully in her small, nearly empty shopping basket. She took a tentative step toward me, her eyes red-rimmed and deeply tired. You look very beautiful, Morgan," she said, her voice small, fragile, and completely devoid of the haughty arrogance that used to define her entire personality. "Thank you," I replied, my voice steady, quiet, and distant. I didn't move closer. I didn't offer a hug. She looked down at her cheap plastic basket, then back at me, tears welling in her eyes. "Your father, he's working part-time as a greeter at the hardware store," she whispered, the shame evident in every syllable. "Fallon hates her waitressing job. She cries every night. We can barely make the rent on the apartment. Morgan. The heating system is terrible. She paused, waiting for the old me to appear. She was waiting for the scapegoat to rush in, overwhelmed with guilt, and whip out a premium credit card to fix the misery. She was waiting for a bridge, a rescue offer, a return to the old, comfortable roles where she was the queen and I was the peasant holding the wallet. I gave her absolutely nothing. You destroyed this family, Morgan, she said finally, her voice cracking, a tiny flicker of her old manipulative anger trying to surface. Are you happy now? Did ruining your own flesh and blood make you feel powerful? I looked at her, feeling a profound sense of closure wash over my soul. No, mother, I said, my tone incredibly soft but completely unmovable. I didn't destroy this family. I just stopped being the expensive plaster that hid the massive, rotting holes in the walls. You and Dad destroyed this family the moment you decided my only value was the numbers in my bank account. You destroyed it when you laughed while my sister called me useless. I didn't cause your downfall. I just stopped paying to delay it. I gripped the handle of my heavy cart and began to push past her. Morgan, please, she sobbed quietly, reaching out a trembling hand. Don't go. We're your family. I stopped, looking back over my shoulder one last time. You were never my family, I said quietly. You were just an incredibly expensive habit, and I'm finally clean. I walked out of the aisle, paid for my groceries, and stepped out into the cool evening air. I loaded my car, started the engine, and drove toward the vibrant city skyline. I realized then that my revenge wasn't about inflicting pain, it was about reclaiming my own reality. Money doesn't buy love. It only buys leverage for people who want to control you. I was no longer the invisible workhorse. I was the architect of my own, incredibly peaceful and authentic life. So I have to ask, am I the villain in this story? Was I wrong to finally lock the bank vault and let them hit the absolute rock bottom that they created?